breakfast puppies?
This podcast contains adult language and content and is meant for mature audiences. Listener discretion is advised.
Okay, man. Roll a saving throw versus listening to the Glitterbois. Righteous. All right. Cool.
Welcome back, Matthew.
Hey, thank you. I almost sound human again.
Almost. Especially now that we've turned off that monitoring.
Oh, my God.
Previously, you were both a robotic scratchy post. Now you're just a scratchy post.
I really feel like I was channeling Starscream, but, with more bass. Yeah, I was like, because I felt it in me, but I don't know that I have the range to really push the air over my wounded, heated bits in my throat.
Oh,
but
man.
I understand why he would shriek at Megatron right now, and I think with a little more healing, I could be that person.
I've tried to do the Starscream voice in private, and I'm going to keep it that way.
It's hard. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, it is important with advancing age to make sure you have moisture in your air as you wallow in the wonder of that is AC. Otherwise, your bits will swell and try and kill you. And that is where I've been, and that's all the explanation you're getting.
Thank you very much. This is our first session with Matthew after his break. Jacob is also here with us today. Howdy. We're going to go ahead and open up into a topic of, you want to lead it off, Jacob?
Well, I thought Matthew had a question for us. And
oh, yeah. So I'm sitting here because we are organized as a highly professional podcast, we assure you. And I hear session 0. What exactly is session 0? And how do we get to it in the hundreds?
Well, you start with it. That's one of the key elements. So the general conceit of a session 0, and it goes by other names, but session 0 has become one of the most common, is getting all the players together around the table to do character creation and other things to prepare for the game. It's not the meet in the tavern episode. It's the pilot that never got released episode. the writer's room, you could say, for the story you're going to write.
Yeah.
Okay.
Session 0 is something that I believe every good campaign needs. Like if you're all just meeting online or something and sharing emails back and forth and, the GM's just like, oh, just play whatever or something. I don't think that campaign's going to last very long. A good campaign, I think, requires that first, we're not going to play, we're just going to talk ideas out kind of session.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I didn't know there was an actual name for it.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of grew out of the tendency for all the players to get together and roll up their characters around the table and have that freeform conversation, check in about what everybody's playing. And as gaming, just evolved, that started to morph and things started to get adding in. Game masters of all games would start talking about what sort of setting they were going to be running. The group would, if it was a collaborative effort, the group would discuss ideas and stuff. I remember vaguely in the Greyhawk hardback a discussion about this, and so that would be roughly 2nd edition Advanced Dungeons & Dragons, and the importance of that, because Greyhawk was such a massive world that really deciding where you were going to start geographically and stuff so players could hone in on what they were going to play and that sort of thing was oftentimes the first bits of discussion. It's evolved since then.
I don't think I ever heard the term session 0 until it must have been the early aughts.
Yeah, I mean, I first came across it either on the Happy Jacks podcast or the Fear the Boot podcast. I'd come across it in writing prior to that under a different name, but that was when I first heard it codified as Session Zero, and it's been a thing for over a decade now, as far as I'm aware.
So I understand it, but I understand it as being not session zero, but just coming over to roll up your characters, or in this day of distance, it would be getting on teams or whatever and rolling up characters. Now that it's codified, what is there something else beyond rolling up your characters and kind of feeling out who's around you beyond it to justify the grandiose title of Session Zero?
Well, I use several different forms of Session Zero depending on what sort of game I'm running. Normally, I tend to run more semi-scripted narrative games rather than less free-form games. And so being able to get the players and explain the themes I'm going for, the general conceits of the setting, that sort of thing becomes very important. The other thing is, since I tend to run a lot more gritty, dark games, even if it's fantasy, even if it's high sci-fi, riffs, whatever, we talk about where the trip lines are, where people's limits are on comfort on various things.
Oh, yeah.
And
Okay.
because that's a factor, like I'm sitting here looking at my lovely copy of Recon next to me, and I play with a lot of vets, and I'm used to having discussions about exactly how far they want to go into that and how far everybody else on the table wants to go into that. Because especially when you're doing things that are real close to modern day life, people's comfort levels change, topics, what you're covering. The group that has absolutely no problem going after a band of evil slavers may not be the same. You may also have a group that can't even think about wanting to have that in their game, and understanding that and sharing those concepts. I don't lay out all the details of the game, but I go over the broad themes. Depending on the game, I have a couple checklists I use for potential issues that I, as a game master, need to be avoid or be mindful of. And we go with that. And, themes also include, is this like high heroic, where you are the most, the people who are going to definitely win in the end, and it's heroism from day one to day zero. Is it the hero's journey, or is this the usual suspects, where only one guy is going to walk out on the far side?
It's good to get everybody's expectations set, or at least bring them to the same level. It lets you avoid the uncomfortable situations of having somebody sit down at the table and thinking they're going to be playing a different game and then not be playing that game.
Yeah, as opposed to like riffs is a great one, where do you really want to just have people roll up characters and suddenly be sitting down with a couple hardcore Federation of Magic folk and then one guy playing a dead boy?
Or like again, back to that whole, we've just been chatting online and the GM says, just make whatever. That's a recipe for disaster. It's good in a game as broad as Rifts to have that session to sit down and say, look, I only want characters made from this set of books in this part of the world. My game, I'm kind of wanting to focus more on like the seedy underbelly of the Colorado baronies. So it's not going to make much sense if we bring in anything from Faye's world. But so let's kind of keep the power level low, or otherwise it'd be like, look, we're going to go blow up gods. So I want you to make a god blower upper, whole team of them. Yeah.
3 cosmic nights later.
I'm actually interested in what you were saying, Jacob, about checklists for common. And I'm just going to use I suppose the word like trigger for that. Is there like my gaming is decidedly antediluvian. Like I am not up on the current meta.
Yeah.
So.
No, I mean, there's one of the things I do go through for some of my games is if we are going to have a thing like the, even though I'm not a huge fan of the X card for that's a whole side conversation, but like if something's gone a little too far for somebody, how do we reel it back in? How do we, and establishing that in session 0 is super important. I've run a couple of role-playing games, including one in Rifts where everybody was collectively slowly losing their mind in slightly different ways. The old Palladium mental illness tables were wonderful. And so, but yeah, to answer your question, that is the basics. The level of the checklist I have 3 that I basically rotate through. 2 of them I got from other sources and heavily modified them. One of them is a great Google Forms checklist that is really good for groups that have never played together, that are coming from very different backgrounds, because it can produce a shared anonymized report for the players, but I have the details for who answered what. So everybody can like look and see where people's comfort levels are. And if you're playing with adults, they can be mindful of where everybody's sensitivities and concern are. And in some games that matters. So, you know, that helps put it back on the group rather than all on the GM to be managing those expectations.
I like that. I have seen described in non-complimentary terms that process on many groups online, like Facebook particularly, in role-playing groups. Have you found people to be very, like, you're obviously using it because you feel it improves your game. Have you found any pushback to anyone sitting at the table, or is that literally just an online back in my day nonsense BS that people are just so prone to?
I have found pushback to that element of it. And oftentimes, and honestly, it usually just takes some explanation of what we're going for. And part of the strength of the session 0 is it helps establish that uniformity of purpose at the table that as gamers we all should be striving for, which is to collectively tell a story. One of the things that I think has always been kind of a push-pull situation in gaming is how much of that lands on the game master's shoulders, and how much I'm willing to take on at the game master for making sure everybody is having fun is directly related to how much you're paying me. And as a former pro GM, how much, you know, when I was clearing $120 a night role playing, running games for people, it's on me to make sure you're having a good time. The rest of the time, I don't care what bottle of whiskey you brought.
Okay, I understand the kind of person that I am. I feel that I am pretty self-aware, especially when it comes to the way I like to game, and both my pros and cons, my strengths and weaknesses as a gamer. And I feel that I need a session 0, not just as a GM, but I need it as a player. If a GM has, pulled me in to play in their game, or I have, expressed interest in a game, and it's like, just make a character. Yeah, we'll just do whatever. Here's some limits, and we'll just start playing when we sit down. It's like, that's giving me some red flags, because that GM hasn't really made any attempt to make sure that this whole group can vibe together. And I need to be able to sit down with everybody there and get the feeling of, am I gonna like this vibe of these assembled people? And are they gonna like the way I play and my ADHD ass constantly being distracted and, doing my best to pay attention, but, it is what it is. It's one of my weaknesses, and I got to make sure that I am not going to bring everybody else down.
I think that's really interesting, and especially in modern gaming, because back in the day, there was the assumption that you at the very least knew most of the people you were sitting down with. You either knew the DM or GM or another player, or it wasn't a collection of barely known people, or even less tenuous than that, like utter unknowns. And I think maybe some of the pushback I was referring to earlier would be the nostalgia factor from just that. Just being like, yeah, well, back in my day, it's like, dude, back in your day, there were rotary phones. Like, no one was, we weren't meeting by video across the country, man. I mean,
well, the founding fathers didn't intend for us to game this way.
I do, however, I will play devil's advocate for just a moment here, just for fun.
Devil doesn't need an advocate, Matthew. Just saying.
Oh,
Devil always.
Devil never needs an advocate. But I will allow
the
it.
devil's work, Matthew. Fuck, where was I just going? The devil is easily confused these days. There's a part of me that's worried that was part of the initial nostalgia form factor of it, was the I know you as X, and that is how we became friends. As you put everyone out there all at once at the beginning in a mass sense, it makes sense. It's like, okay, we're doing this with 1,000 people over the course of the next 6 months. We got to have this form, otherwise less people will come. But that's a very assembly line kind of concept for such an intimate endeavor that you're doing with people, which is playing make-believe.
Yep.
And it strikes me not as a problem. I'm not going quite that far with my devil's advocacy, but it does make something ineffable way more formulaic and way less able to take risks or make people change through it.
Yeah, no, you're fundamentally right on that. And honestly, when I said I have like 3 checklists I use, and I mentioned I modified 2 of them heavily, and that was literally part of what I was taking out. And these aren't hard. None of these checklists I'm using are hard yes nos or that sort of thing. It's all scale based, usually on various topics, and that may or may not come up in the game session. And while there is that assembly line factor to it, man, I'm staring down the barrel of 50 years old. I got a day job. Trying to remember this stuff from session to session is a pain. And so being able to grab the sheets and go like, okay, is this going to be an issue next session? And do I need to tweak
Absolutely.
it?
Well, that's a good point. We are getting advanced in our years, and we have less time available as we get busier and busier with adult shit and other hobbies. I don't have time to waste on things that aren't going to fulfill my needs. So gaming is one of my needs. It's a hobby, but it is one of my needs. It is my need for entertainment, my need for that storytelling fulfillment. And if I don't get it, well, I'm going to be pissed off. And if that's because we didn't lay down the basics and make sure that we all vibed right, because yes, Matthew, we're all playing make-believe, but there's some people out there whose make-believe is very different than my make-believe. Very different. Rule 34 exists, and I'm not cool with a lot of it.
I was going to say, I wonder if that's a function of just the overpopulation and, the strange societal pressures we're all under. Because, I remember sitting down with friends way different than, Rule 34, for example. And there is a variety, and I think we should address this in something else, but there is a variety of dysfunction out there that finds relatively safe expression in the make-believe world, be it World of Warcraft, be it any kind of online community. And it's certainly prevalent in gaming. And I've sat down with some sick fucks before. Like people that if I saw on the street and no one was watching, I'd put them in a trash can.
Yeah.
Or maybe several trash cans.
I don't want to game
Because
with those people.
there's something, there's something fucking wrong with them.
The one thing I've found more often with session zeros in particular is just like the initial sit down and roll up your characters. One of the biggest strengths about session zeros is being able to have characters develop shared backstories.
Yes.
And that's a huge, huge plus because the amount of hooks you get as a game master out of that, oh my God.
To me, it's so much more exciting and fulfilling and inspiring than it was back in the day. Oh, you're running D&D? Yeah, I'm going to bring my 12th level ranger. Back when that was normal, it was totally acceptable. I got so used to it. And then as those needs changed and as I got more used to session zero, I was like, I can't even imagine playing that way. Like sitting down to run a game and somebody just like wants to bring their established character. Yep. That's so weird to me.
Oh, yeah. I mean, that's weird in modern day gaming to begin with now. People would, it's one thing to have everybody roll up characters, but to be walking around with the character you're moving from game to game is like, that kind of went out with the rotary phone.
Yeah.
Yeah, he says, carefully unfolding something out of his pocket and tucking it under the desk.
The character sheet you've been keeping in your pocket since, what, the 80s?
I mean, lamination is not recent. I'm just saying. You know, it's funny. On previous episodes, I was telling how I was moving away from D&D, and I find it very interesting that most of this session has been using that. And as such, I would like to present you, the two of you, with the last D&D thing I have besides my dad's dice. This is my Wimmick character.
Oh.
I gave everything else to my roommate's 12-year-old young girl who has just discovered Dungeons and Dragons. And I gave her just about $2,000 worth of D&D stuff for her birthday.
Raising that kid right.
You know, she's a nice kid. She's pretty shy, but this is something that's brought her out. You know, it's made her. And honestly, I think a lot of people probably have the same thing. But I just wanted to show you that this is in fact my last piece of D&D in the house.
He says as he's holding up a very nice mini.
Yeah,
very nice.
Yeah. Is that one of the pre-painted ones, or did you paint that yourself?
It is. Yeah, no, this is that 3.5. The tubes they were selling of Wizards of the Coast stuff. Yeah. This is actually a character I had with a friend who's no longer with us, where we both played essentially giant centaur cats and wreaked havoc across Faerun. And I will not get rid of that, but everything else is gone.
I know we keep bringing up D&D, but again, it's the game that
it's hard
I
not
would
to
say the vast majority of us, of gamers, if anybody listening had probably got their start there, or at least spent some time there and understands the conventions of that game.
Yeah, it was only like within the last 15 years of a hobby that stretches back to the 70s that you started to see games that were in some way, shape, or form not an aping of or reaction to Dungeons & Dragons. On a recent episode, you and I were talking about how Palladium itself started out as a modification of Dungeons & Dragons in some ways. And, you know, things evolve, and Session Zero is just one of those things.
You know, I know I play devil's advocate, but on the whole, I like it. I am in favor of people being more open and that the story flows better. That is the entire point. But I am also one of those, I have the bad brain chemistry that allows me to instantly poof to all sides of an argument in like this enveloping circle. And like I can see how this, especially to the same people who refuse to engage with, you know, people saying, so what's your preferred gender pronoun? And they're like, don't you see what I am? Those kinds of people would probably still have a problem with this kind of thing.
I've run into a few of those. Often when I explain it, they get it. It's whether or not they let me explain it. And if they're not going to let me explain it, well, you're not sitting at my table anyway. So, you know.
I'd be interested if you feel up to it, and if you feel like you have the time, some pointers on how you go about bringing someone probably older and more reactionary into a more modern way of thinking in a gentle way that allows them to engage and maybe gives a little chink into that armor of anger and fear.
Oh, I mean, yeah, I mean that's a huge topic on its own. And but I will say
for another
that,
one.
Yeah, but I will say, as someone who has in very recent times run a group with a 54-year-old card-carrying Reagan Republican and a self-described femboy cat at the same table and had it go swimmingly, it can be done, you know?
Nice. Well done, actually.
And I think Session Zero probably helped with that, didn't it?
Oh, heck yeah. Again, Session Zero, especially when you're sitting with a bunch of adults who don't know each other and don't know each other.
Well, I do it even if everybody already knows each other.
Oh, yeah.
And that's because I like collaborative storytelling. I like to be able to sit down and say, look, I want to run a game that's like, here's my 5-sentence pitch. Now let's build the rest of it out together.
Yeah. And like, we've talked a lot of from the game master perspective on the power of a Session Zero, and we mentioned a couple things here and there, like how players will develop shared backstories through a Session Zero, and how that's huge benefits. But other things I've seen out of Session Zeros is players, because they have that comfort with the people they're sitting with, and you've started this shared narrative and shared space, they'll go, I usually play X. I think I kind of want to try Y. And so you have the person who always plays the mage suddenly going, I'm going to try to play a fighter. And suddenly they're getting support from the other players for taking that risk. And not only you should do that. That would be cool. I think you'd be good at that. To tips on how to run the type of fighter they want to run for someone who's not as familiar with the combat system and has always been a spell slinger or whatever. You get that teaming aspect of the players helping each other, which, again, I'm a game master who likes putting a lot of the work on the shared mind space onto the players.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's actually really interesting what you just said, because as humans and how we perceive and learn from each other, so much of that is done without bold declarations. So much of that is done in conversation. So much of that is done with, here's what you need. So much of that giving off of who you are as a personality is done through these little micro interactions, and not just, the bold, we're showing up, this is who I am. And I actually really like that. And I haven't thought about that before, about how much of it is in the margins of the human interaction, that once you've done a couple hours from that, you can sit down at a table and kind of know that person and kind of know where they're going to go a little bit better.
It's Session Zero. Give it a shot. Just look online for Session Zero. You'll find a bunch of different ways to do it. Everything from fill outs for the game master to give to the players, to questionnaires, to how to do it, to explanations of things like veils and lines, to all of that. It can be a whole afternoon of going down a rabbit hole and deciding how you want your Session Zero to look like.
Excellent. I now feel like I know Session Zero. What did you learn today, Billy?
I know we did a Session Zero when we put this podcast together. So yeah.
Honestly, I thought that's where we were going with this, because, there was one of the few three hosts we had done. I thought this, I didn't realize we were talking about the game.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Matthew, it's good to have you back.
Absolutely.
Thanks. It's good to be here. I missed it. I'm still a little scratchy, but hopefully my dulcet non-nasal tones will come back in the intervening years. If not, get used to it.
Yes, folks, get used to it. Thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening.
Okay.
Starships, magic, mystic martial arts, romance. All of these can be found in A Cloak of Blades by Isaac Sher. You might have heard my name before. I've done a lot of voiceover work for Breakfast Puppies, and I've recently released my first novel. It's available on Amazon as an ebook and paperback, and you can get it for free if you have a Kindle Unlimited subscription. I do hope you'll support my work as you're supporting Breakfast Puppies, and it's been a pleasure talking with you today. Have a good one.
You've been listening to The Glitterbois, a Palladium Books fan podcast. Glitterbois, Rifts, the Megaverse, and all other such topics are the property of Kevin Siembieda and Palladium Books. Please buy all their stuff and help keep them in print and making more games. You can order directly at palladiumbooks.com, and their entire catalog is available digitally at Drive-Thru RPG as well. Our opening music is 8-Bit Bass and Lead by Furby Guy from freesound.org. This closing music is Caravana by Philip Gross, available at freemusicarchive.org. All sound effects used are self-made or acquired via Creative Commons Zero license. If you like what you have heard, find us on Twitter and Facebook as The Glitterbois. That's BOIS. And check us out online at breakfastpuppies.com/glitterboys. And also join us on the Breakfast Puppies Network Discord at breakfastpuppies.com/discord. And if you want to help us out, please spread the word and help us build a community. Thanks again for listening. We'll catch you next time.